According to FBI statistics, nearly 25% of girls and 16% of boys experience sexual abuse before the age of 18. But what happens when the abuser is someone meant to protect them? In this chilling true crime documentary, we explore how a stepfather's betrayal escalated to murder. The Miller family seemed to have it all. Jennifer, a biotech executive with piercing blue eyes and an air of confidence, had built a life of luxury in their suburban paradise. Her husband, David, a charming architect, doted on both Jennifer and her teenage daughter, Melissa, from a previous marriage. To the outside world, they were the epitome of a blended family success story. But beneath the manicured lawns and designer clothes, a sinister undercurrent was brewing. David's lingering glances at Melissa grew more frequent, while the once bubbly teen became withdrawn. Jennifer, consumed by her work, failed to notice the subtle shifts in her home's dynamics. As weeks passed, hushed arguments and unexplained absences became more common. One fateful evening, Jennifer returned early from a business trip. The house was eerily quiet as she ascended the stairs, her heels echoing on the hardwood. What she discovered in the master bedroom would shatter their perfect family facade forever, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in betrayal, violence, and death. Melissa's world imploded as Jennifer stood frozen in the doorway. The weight of her hidden anguish threatened to crush her. What unspeakable truth lay at the heart of the family's unraveling? At 17, Melissa had once been the picture of teenage vitality. Her infectious laughter used to echo through the halls of their sprawling suburban home, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence that now enveloped her. The change had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first, but as weeks turned into months, the light in Melissa's eyes dimmed, replaced by a haunted expression that spoke volumes. Melissa's journey to this point had been far from simple. Her biological father, a charismatic but unreliable figure, had drifted in and out of her life like a restless wind. His sporadic appearances left Melissa with a deep-seated need for stability and paternal affection. When Jennifer introduced David as her new husband, Melissa had been cautiously optimistic. Here was a chance at the father figure she had always craved. In the beginning, David had seemed perfect. He took an interest in Melissa's hobbies, attended her school events, and even helped her with her homework. For a brief, shining moment, Melissa felt like she finally had the complete family she had always dreamed of. But as time passed, the dream began to warp into something far more sinister. It started with lingering glances that made Melissa's skin crawl. Then came the accidental brushes against her in the hallway, the way David's eyes would roam over her body when Jennifer wasn't looking. Melissa tried to convince herself she was imagining things, that she was overreacting to innocent gestures. But deep down, she knew the truth. The internal struggle tore Melissa apart. On one hand, she loved her mother fiercely and didn't want to shatter the happiness Jennifer had found with David. On the other, the weight of her stepfather's increasingly predatory behavior was crushing her spirit. She withdrew from friends, her grades began to slip, and the vibrant girl she once was faded away, replaced by a shell of her former self. Melissa's phone became both her lifeline and her tormentor. Late-night text messages from David, filled with inappropriate comments and thinly veiled threats, kept her in a constant state of anxiety. She began to sleep with her phone under her pillow, terrified that Jennifer might see the messages, yet equally afraid of deleting them and losing the only evidence of David's true nature. As the secret grew, so did Melissa's desperation. She considered confiding in her best friend Sarah countless times. The words would rise in her throat only to die on her lips as fear took hold. What if Sarah didn't believe her? What if the truth got back to Jennifer, or worse, to David? The potential consequences paralyzed her into continued silence. The facade Melissa maintained grew more fragile with each passing day. She plastered on smiles for family dinners, forcing herself to eat while her stomach churned with anxiety. She made excuses to avoid being alone with David, fabricating after-school activities and study groups, but she couldn't escape the suffocating atmosphere of her own home, where danger lurked behind every closed door. One afternoon, as Melissa sat in her school counselor's office discussing college applications, she felt the words bubbling up inside her. The kind-faced woman across the desk sensed Melissa's distress and gently asked if there was anything else she wanted to talk about. For a breathless moment, Melissa teetered on the edge of revelation. Her heart raced, her palms grew sweaty, and she opened her mouth to speak. The words caught in Melissa's throat, the weight of her secret still too heavy to voice. Unbeknownst to her, David was spiraling deeper into his own twisted obsession. What hidden traumas from his past had awakened this monster within? David Miller had always been a master of facades. To the outside world, he was the quintessential family man, successful, charming, and devoted to his wife and stepdaughter. But beneath the polished exterior lurked a darkness that had been simmering for years, waiting for the right moment to break free. Born into a wealthy family, David's childhood had been a study in contradictions. His parents, pillars of the community, maintained a flawless public image while their home life was marred by emotional neglect and unspoken tensions. Young David learned early on the power of appearances and the art of manipulation. As he grew older, David's relationships followed a troubling pattern. His first marriage to a woman named Rachel ended abruptly after just 2 years. Friends whispered about David's controlling behavior and Rachel's sudden withdrawal from social circles. His second marriage to Samantha lasted longer, but was plagued by rumors of infidelity and emotional abuse. It was during his marriage to Jennifer that David's long-suppressed desires began to surface. At first, his interest in Melissa seemed innocent enough, a stepfather trying to bond with his new daughter. He took an interest in her hobbies, attended her school events, and offered to help with her homework. But as Melissa blossomed into a young woman, David's gaze lingered a little too long. His touches became a little too familiar. The transformation from stepfather to predator was gradual, almost imperceptible. David expertly manipulated both Melissa and Jennifer, gaslighting them to maintain his control. He would make subtle comments about Melissa's appearance, then deny any inappropriate intent when confronted. He engineered situations to be alone with Melissa, all while convincing Jennifer that her long hours at work were straining their family dynamic. As his obsession grew, David's behavior became more erratic. He installed a hidden camera in Melissa's bathroom under the guise of checking for mold. He began tracking her phone, claiming it was for her safety. When Melissa expressed discomfort with his attention, David would turn the tables, accusing her of misinterpreting his fatherly affection and making her feel guilty for doubting him. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer was away on a business trip, and Melissa had come home early from school, feeling unwell. David, working from home that day, saw his opportunity. He entered Melissa's room, ostensibly to check on her, but his intentions were far from paternal. What transpired in those next few minutes would haunt Melissa for years to come. David's mask finally slipped, revealing the full extent of his depravity. As Melissa recoiled in horror and disgust, David realized the gravity of his actions. In that moment, he knew there was no going back. The carefully constructed life he had built was about to come crashing down around him. Panic set in as David's mind raced through possible scenarios. He couldn't let Melissa expose him. Everything he had worked for, his marriage, his reputation, his freedom, was at stake. As Melissa reached for her phone, determination hardening her tear-stained face, David made a split-second decision that would seal all their fates. While David grappled with his darkest impulses, Jennifer's carefully constructed reality was about to shatter. What signs had she overlooked in her pursuit of the perfect family? As the truth began to surface, Jennifer would be forced to confront the devastating cost of her ambition and the limits of her own perception. Jennifer Miller had always prided herself on her ability to read people. In the cutthroat world of biotech, this skill had propelled her to the top of her field. But within the walls of her own home, Jennifer's vaunted intuition had failed her spectacularly. For months, she had been blind to the growing tension between her husband and daughter, chalking up their strained interactions to typical teenage angst and step-family growing pains. As she juggled board meetings and product launches, Jennifer clung to the image of domestic bliss she had so carefully cultivated. She dismissed the fleeting looks of discomfort that crossed Melissa's face when David entered a room, attributing them to her daughter's natural shyness. The sudden silences that fell over the dinner table were explained away as everyone being tired after long days at work and school. But as weeks turned into months, even Jennifer couldn't ignore the subtle shifts in her home's atmosphere. Melissa, once vibrant and outgoing, had become a shadow of her former self. The girls' laughter, once a constant soundtrack to their lives, had faded to near silence. Jennifer noticed her daughter's sudden aversion to physical affection, the way she flinched at unexpected touches or sounds. David, too, had changed. His easy charm seemed forced, his smiles not quite reaching his eyes. He worked longer hours, claiming big projects at the architectural firm, yet Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that he was avoiding their home. When he was present, his gaze often lingered on Melissa in a way that made Jennifer's skin prickle with an unease she couldn't quite name. One evening, as Jennifer pored over quarterly reports in her home office, she overheard a hushed argument between David and Melissa. The words were indistinct, but the tone sent a chill down her spine. Melissa's voice trembled with fear and anger, while David's held a note of desperation she had never heard before. When Jennifer emerged from her office, she found them in the kitchen, standing unnaturally far apart, their faces masks of forced normalcy. That night, sleep eluded Jennifer. She tossed and turned, her mind replaying every interaction she had witnessed between her husband and daughter over the past year. Small incidents that had seemed insignificant at the time now took on sinister undertones. The way David insisted on driving Melissa to school, despite her protests. The father-daughter camping trip that Melissa had returned from early, citing a sudden illness. Jennifer began to pay closer attention, her instincts finally awakening to the wrongness permeating her home. She noticed David's poorly concealed irritation when she suggested family outings, the way he steered conversations away from Melissa's life and activities. Most tellingly, she saw the fear in her daughter's eyes when David entered a room unexpectedly. As suspicion gnawed at her, Jennifer found herself doing things she never imagined. She checked David's phone when he was in the shower, scrolled through his browser history when he left his laptop open. For weeks, she found nothing concrete, just a growing sense of unease and fragments of evidence that didn't quite fit together. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Jennifer had come home early, a migraine forcing her to leave a crucial meeting. As she entered the house, the silence was oppressive. She climbed the stairs intending to lie down when she heard muffled sounds coming from Melissa's room. Jennifer's hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. What she saw when she opened that door would be forever seared into her memory. David, her husband of 5 years, the man she had trusted with her heart and her child, stood over Melissa with a look of unbridled lust and shame. Melissa, tear-stained and disheveled, met her mother's gaze with a mixture of relief and terror. In that moment, Jennifer's world imploded. The carefully constructed facade of their perfect family life crumbled to dust. All the signs she had ignored, all the warnings she had dismissed, crashed over her in a tidal wave of guilt and horror. As David turned to face her, his expression morphing from shock to a calculated calm, Jennifer felt a rage unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The tension in the Miller house had reached its breaking point. With David's duplicity exposed, the facade of family unity lay in ruins. But as darkness descended, an even more sinister force took hold. What desperate act would forever alter the lives of Jennifer, David, and Melissa? The night air crackled with an electric charge as Jennifer paced the living room, her mind reeling from the horrific scene she had witnessed earlier. Melissa sat curled up on the couch, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, eyes red-rimmed and distant. David stood by the fireplace, his usual confident demeanor replaced by a nervous energy that radiated from every pore. Jennifer's voice, normally controlled and measured, trembled with barely contained fury as she confronted her husband. "How long, David? How long have you been abusing our daughter?" The last words came out as a strangled whisper, as if saying them aloud made the nightmare more real. David's face contorted, a mix of shame and defiance warring across his features. "It's not what you think, Jennifer. Melissa and we have a special connection. You've been so busy with work. You don't understand. Don't you dare try to justify this." Jennifer's scream cut through the air like a knife. She whirled to face Melissa, her eyes softening with guilt and anguish. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell me? I could have protected you. I should have seen." Melissa's voice was small, broken. "I was scared. He said no one would believe me, that it would ruin everything." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as years of pent-up pain and fear poured out. The revelation seemed to flip a switch in Jennifer. The successful businesswoman who had built an empire through calculated decisions vanished, replaced by a primal force of maternal rage. She lunged at David, her manicured nails raking across his face. "You monster! I trusted you with my daughter." David stumbled backward, his hand flying to his bleeding cheek. For a moment, shock registered in his eyes, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Think about what you're doing, Jennifer. One word from me, and your precious company's stock will plummet. Who do you think the board will believe? The devoted husband or the workaholic absentee mother?" The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Jennifer's mind raced, weighing options, considering consequences. She had always prided herself on staying 3 steps ahead, but this was uncharted territory. In the tense silence that followed, Melissa's quiet voice cut through the darkness. "Mom, I can't live like this anymore. Please, make it stop." The raw desperation in her daughter's plea shattered the last of Jennifer's restraint. With a feral cry, Jennifer grabbed the heavy crystal vase from the mantel, a wedding gift she noted with bitter irony, and swung it with all her might. The sickening crunch as it connected with David's skull echoed through the room. He crumpled to the floor, a pool of crimson spreading beneath him. Time seemed to stand still as Jennifer and Melissa stared at David's motionless form. The realization of what had just transpired washed over them in waves of horror and relief. Jennifer's CEO instincts kicked in, her mind already formulating a plan. "Melissa, go to your room and pack a bag. Essentials only. We need to leave, now." Her voice was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the chaos that surrounded them. As Melissa hurried upstairs, Jennifer surveyed the scene with clinical detachment. She had built her career on crisis management. This was just another problem to solve. With practiced efficiency, she began to wipe down surfaces, her mind cataloging every detail that needed to be addressed. As dawn broke over the Miller residence, a team of seasoned detectives arrived, their keen eyes trained to spot the tiniest inconsistencies. Detective Sarah Martinez, known for her uncanny ability to see through lies, sensed something amiss from the moment she stepped onto the property. The air was thick with tension as the investigators began their meticulous examination of the crime scene. Detective Martinez surveyed the living room, her gaze lingering on the shattered crystal vase and the dark stain on the expensive carpet. She turned to her partner, Detective John Reeves, a veteran homicide investigator with a reputation for unraveling even the most complex cases. "What do you make of this, John?" she asked, her voice low and measured. Reeves knelt beside the bloodstain, his gloved hand hovering just above the surface. "High-velocity spatter," he murmured, "consistent with blunt force trauma, but something's off about the distribution." He stood, his eyes narrowing as he took in the rest of the room. "It's too clean. Someone tried to sanitize this scene." As the forensic team arrived, led by the renowned Dr. James Chen, the investigation kicked into high gear. Chen's team deployed cutting-edge equipment, including an advanced luminol spray that revealed traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. "There's more here than meets the eye," Chen remarked, his UV light illuminating a trail of faint footprints leading towards the garage. Meanwhile, Detective Martinez began interviewing neighbors and colleagues of the Ashcroft family. A pattern quickly emerged, a facade of perfection that had begun to crack in recent months. Jennifer's assistant mentioned increased tension and distraction at work. Melissa's teachers noted a sudden drop in grades and social withdrawal. Even David's business partners hinted at erratic behavior and missed deadlines. As the investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies in the family's statements began to surface. Jennifer's calm demeanor during questioning struck Martinez as oddly detached for a woman whose husband had just been murdered. Melissa's account of the night's events was fragmented and evasive, hinting at a deeper trauma. The breakthrough came when Detective Reeves uncovered a hidden camera in Melissa's bathroom, carefully concealed behind a vent. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. "This changes everything," Reeves said grimly, his eyes meeting Martinez's across the room. "We're not just looking at a murder anymore. This is something far more sinister." Forensic analysis of David's personal devices revealed a trove of disturbing evidence. Encrypted files contained hundreds of illicit photos and videos of Melissa, dating back several years. The sheer volume and nature of the material painted a horrifying picture of long-term abuse and manipulation. As the pieces fell into place, the full extent of the Miller family's dark secrets came to light. Jennifer's initial story of a home invasion crumbled under the weight of forensic evidence and digital footprints. The detectives pieced together a timeline of escalating abuse, culminating in the fatal confrontation that had left David dead and a family in ruins. In a tense interview room at the police station, Detective Martinez confronted Jennifer with the mounting evidence. "Mrs. Ashcroft, we know what really happened that night," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "We understand the impossible situation you were in, but taking the law into your own hands was not the answer." Jennifer's carefully constructed facade finally shattered. Tears streaming down her face, she confessed to the killing, recounting the horror of discovering her husband's true nature and the desperate act that followed. "I just wanted to protect my daughter," she sobbed, the weight of her actions visible in every line of her face. The aftermath of the Miller family tragedy sent shockwaves through their affluent community. Neighbors who once envied their seemingly perfect life now grappled with the horror that had unfolded behind closed doors. Melissa, forever changed by the abuse she endured, faced a long road to recovery. Jennifer, once a pillar of success, found herself facing legal consequences for her actions, her career and reputation in tatters. The case sparked difficult conversations about the dangers of maintaining facades and the importance of truly knowing what's happening in one's home. It served as a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even the most picture-perfect families may harbor dark secrets. In the end, the Ashcroft tragedy underscored the critical need for open communication, vigilance, and the courage to speak up when something feels wrong, no matter the potential consequences.